Good afternoon, viewers, and welcome to this Zoom discussion on the life and work of the late Dr. Martin Luther King, who, as we know, has been had been one of the leading luminaries in the struggle for the dignity of the Afro-Guyanese and the people, the working people on the whole, in the United States during the mid-50s, right up to the time of his assassination in 1958. Dr. King had he been alive today, he would have been 94 years old. And as we know, he was born on January 15, 1929, and was assassinated in April 4th, 1968. He died at a relatively young age of 39 years, but he has made a great impact, not only in the United States, but in the world at large. Dr. King was one of the prominent leaders the civil rights movement from around, as I said, the mid-1950s until his assassination in 1968. Many people may not know, but his birth name was Michael, not Martin, but it was changed to Martin after his father went to Germany and was influenced by the Lutheran Church. With us to discuss the life, work, and contribution of Dr. King is former President, Mr. Donald Ramotar. Welcome, former President, to the program. And we will be joined later by Mr. Raymond Cummings. Both men need no introduction in Guyana, so I will move straight ahead and ask former President, Mr. Ramotar, to give us some initial thoughts.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come and share some of my views on this great internationalist, great American man, Martin Luther King, who, as Hydar just said, celebrates his 94th birthday. This year, actually, it's 55 years since he died, so he would have been dead much longer than the amount of time that he lived. But the very fact that today we are here to discuss and reflect on his life gives an indication of the impact that he had, not only on American society, but also he captured the imagination of the whole world. I'm happy to be speaking here today too, because what is happening to Martin Luther King, in this great man, in the views that he expressed, has happened to many other revolutionary leaders in the world from time immemorial. A lot of progressive thinkers, when they passed away, their ideas or what they champion is sometimes not very well represented. And today, the same thing is happening to Martin Luther King. There's an attempt to take away the revolutionary aspect of his thinking, of his preaching, of his speeches by the establishment and the mainstream media. He is being just portrayed as a godly priest who advocated strongly for the ending of segregation and the brotherhood of mankind. What is not being spoken about today is his anti-war teachings. His famous speech on Vietnam is totally forgotten by the mainstream media. And today, what is also clouded was his stand to support and the support he gives to the working people in the fight for the poor. In fact, in one of the last main speeches that he made, among the last speeches that he made, was a speech, I think, in Memphis, Tennessee, when he was addressing, and he was there in solidarity with the strike of the workers, the garbage collectors. whose cause he championed, not only as African Americans, but he championed their cause as working people as well. He himself had acknowledged that the struggle, he actually, I would say that his life could be looked at in several stages. In 1954-55, when he began his struggle for human rights after Rosa Parks had refused to go to the back of the bus and started a big movement in Alabama, his main focus was to end segregation and to allow African Americans the same rights as other peoples in the the white people in the United States. And he was strong in his advocacy in that regard. But that was probably the first aspect of his life. But being engaged in the struggle, it brought him into contact with different segments of the population. And his views, in my mind, evolved. He himself, at one time in one of his conversations that he had, he said that the struggle to end the segregation and to have the right to vote, the struggle for the right to vote of the Americans up to the 1960s, African Americans did not have that right. And that fight that he carried and won, he said it was much easier, although it had such heroic struggles and many people died and they had to face the wrath of the state. But he himself said it was much easier than the struggle that he was now embarking on when he was fighting for social transformation and social changes. And why did he say that? Because he was now coming to confront the system as a whole. He himself mentioned, it is not what I am saying, but he himself mentioned that to give the vote to African Americans, to desegregate schools, to desegregate the lunch counters and so forth, didn't cost the state any money. But at this new stage where he was challenging the system, he came up against the system. And that is what I think he recognized at that very early stage. And that system that he was speaking about, I didn't see him describe it in the same way that I'm describing it, but it is the system that produces and reproduces and perpetuates poverty, inequality, and it is reflected in some of his speeches. For instance, one of the speech he made when he mentioned about 100 years after the emancipation of slavery in the United States, which I think was in 1863, he said the African Americans were still not free. And he was recognizing from then he began to recognize that the system that was oppressing the people and the poor. He also raised his voice against the military-industrial complex. He was challenging the imperialist system of wanting to dominate the whole world and to put the world's resources at the disposal of the ruling class in the most developed countries. But now we see that it's being concentrated in the hands of one big country at this point in time. He was challenging those who were filthy rich while millions live in serious poverty. Another feature of Martin Luther King's activism that is not spoken about today is his views on war. At this time, it is particularly relevant to reflect on his position on the war in Vietnam. Because when he made his speech on Vietnam exactly 1 year before he was assassinated in April of 1967, he came out and said silence would be like collaborating. It's time to speak out against what was happening in Vietnam. And he did not speak in support of the Viet Cong or Hanoi or the countries that supported Vietnam actively, like the Soviet Union and China. He was speaking as an American because he loved America, but he was appalled at the role that America was playing and the direction that it was actually going down. And there he spoke about, he was able to link, because he was such a fantastic orator, that he was able to link what was happening in Vietnam and how it was causing the perpetuation of poverty in the United States. And he pointed out also some of the immorality 8,000 miles away that Black Americans were asked to go to fight in disproportionate numbers than white Americans, to claiming that they were looking after the freedom of the people of Vietnam while they were still segregated or still live in a lot of discrimination and so forth in the land of their own birth. But I said today, he was condemning the United States, pointing out that they were spending some, maybe about almost $1,000 for every soldier that they killed in Vietnam, while they were only spending about $50 to try to alleviate the plight of the poor in their own country. Now, I think at this time, if Dr. King was alive, he would have taken a very strong stand against his government in the United States again, because of the direction that it is going in the war that is taking place in Ukraine, that is killing a lot of people. What has come about very clearly at this point in time is that this was a careful war prepared a long time ago to try to destroy Russia. And that came out more recently with the admission by Merkel, former Chancellor of Germany, who said that the Minsk Accord, you will record the Minsk Accord, it was an agreement that they signed with Belarus, with Russia and Ukraine. The whole idea was because they were attacking the eastern part of Ukraine, where the Russian population dominated and were the vast majority. They came to a political settlement where they would have given more autonomy to those regions and to allow them to use their own language, not to ban their language, etc. And they would have remained within the state of Ukraine, but with some more autonomy to reflect their own specific nationality issue. Now, Merkel came out recently, this was done in 2014, and recently Merkel said that that was done to fool the Russians, basically, to give themselves time to prepare the Ukrainians because of NATO's fight against Russia. And not only did she said that, but her French colleague, who was supposed to be another guarantor, Hollande, who was the president of France at the time, he said that he agreed with Merkel that the main intention was not for peace, but to prepare for war. And the then president of Ukraine also mentioned that it was to fool Russia to give them more time to try to destroy Russia. So I am convinced that plot, which reflects a kind of a hatred against Russia, mainly because I believe Russia is the inheritors of the Soviet Unions and the hate that they had for the working class state of the Soviet Union is now being transferred to Russia, because Russia is no longer a socialist country. It's a capitalist country, but they're transferring that hate to Russia in their attack against them.
Okay, and I think we may have to dedicate a special session to look at what's going on in the war in Ukraine. But we are here to discuss Martin Luther, and I know you are trying to link that to the whole question of war and peace. But what would you say were some of the influences that were that influenced Martin Luther King to take on this fight, as it were?
Okay.
I know that he was someone who was influenced by Mahatma Gandhi as well. And I'm wondering whether there may have been some influence on the Gandhian kind of non-cooperation and evil and all of that.
Yeah.
And the passive kind of resistance.
Yeah, but before I come to that, let me just say that we cannot put a wall between Martin Luther King and what is happening today, because I think Martin Luther King is still very relevant today, and therefore that is why I'm saying in fact the situation today is far worse. He had made the statement that if mankind don't stop war, war will destroy mankind.
Yeah.
And that is why I'm saying that and today the question of a nuclear war is very important. It is looming on the horizon with Russia and Ukraine. But let me come to answer what you have just, where you want to direct me to. Martin Luther King was also a product of his time. You will recall that after the Second World War, you had a massive upsurge in national liberation movement, and the country is going towards socialism to build a new life, to move away from this exploitation, exploitative type of state and so forth. And Martin Luther King in the United States itself, I would say that a kind of a colonial system existed in the United States, but it was a different kind of colonialism, where the colonialists, which would be the government of the United States, and the Black African Americans were living within the same state itself, but they were extracting super profit because of their discrimination, working for a smaller amount of money for the same job that white people do, etc., etc. So what Martin Luther King had done when they started the struggle to end segregation, at the same time, they were challenging the colonial kind of oppression that they were on. So their struggle too was a kind of an anti-colonial and national liberation struggle for the freedom of their people. And I think that reflected what was taking place in the world at the time. And then I mentioned that my introductory remarks, where his views evolve in the process of the struggle to begin to see the exploitative nature of the state and begin to see how wars itself was being done in order to extract profits and being used to colonialize and oppress other countries as well.
Military industrial complex.
Right, he spoke about the military. As far as his work was concerned, yes, he spoke a lot about Mahatma Gandhi, and he expressed a lot of support for Gandhi's ideas and Gandhi's methods of struggle. And he himself felt that completely. He himself felt that morally, I think two things happened there. One, he came into conflict with a lot of other African leaders at the time who were awakening the struggle of the awakening. Remember, it was the same period of Malcolm X and the Soledad brothers and so forth. And there was a big debate in the African American community about armed struggle. And he took a different position from the rest of them, many of them who were advocating picking up arms to fight for the liberation of the Black people. But I think two things coincided. One, I think he recognized that they didn't have the force to pick up arms to overthrow the government, that they didn't have the necessary resources to do so. But also, I think it coincided with his own makeup, that he honestly believed the morality of the struggle. He honestly believed, like Mahatma Gandhi probably did, that the violence itself tends to dehumanize those who even execute them. And he thought that it was more effective to carry out the struggle in the non-violent or resistance type of way.
But he, even though he was a religious leader and he adopted the non-violent one, but he himself was the subject of a lot of violence.
Oh, yes.
In fact, he was arrested and imprisoned over 20, 30 times.
But there was other assassination attempts.
Yes,
there was one woman who stabbed him. And when he was in the first book that he wrote, he was doing in New York. He was doing a book signing when he was attacked.
Yes,
and
he was stabbed. Yes.
And he made a beautiful speech of it, because the headline in the newspaper had said that if he had only sneezed, he would have, the knife that was launched in him would have punctured his aorta and would have caused him to die.
You know, his mother also was shot and killed while she was in a church playing the church piano. Actually, they were going for his father, who was also a very militant person, but the mother was closer by, so she got shot instead. So he came from a strong militant family background too.
But that again also, I think, tell you about his character.
Yes.
That if he lost his mother in that way, but still he did not allow the bitterness to cloud his views and to make him not see that the right. He proved, I believe, when you look back at the time now, with the debate that was going on at the time, I think he proved to have been the most correct in the methods he chose to struggle and so forth. But I think it is interesting to note the period of time that he died. The period of time that he was assassinated, and many people believe that the CIA had a hand in his assassination. Yeah, but just like how the CIA is widely believed, and not without reason, that the CIA had a hand in the killing of Kennedy, which shows you the powerful nature of the state, and even above the elected leaders of the country.
Yeah.
And it was at that period of time when he was recognizing that the class struggle is important, when he was linking his struggle with the international struggle. And I think about it today, about what he would have been doing. Let's say you don't want to talk about Ukraine, I suppose, but what he would have been doing.
It's an important subject, but
but I'm talking about what would Martin, what we know of his speeches and his writing, what would have been his position in America and the Middle East? For instance, what would he have said about the Americans in Syria stealing oil from the people, totally uninvited in there? Nobody invited them, but they're there and they're taking the people's oil. Total advantage, total colonial type of imperialist type of domination. I think Martin Luther King would have spoken out vehemently against those things. And those of us who believe in what Martin Luther King was advocating, I think we also have a responsibility of speaking out on these matters.
Okay, but you had made an interesting point, and I don't know if I got you correct, but you, and I think the Voting Rights Act was passed in the United States only in 1965.
Yes.
Which gave the universal franchise to all Americans, which in effect meant that, and I stand corrected here, that in 1953 in Guyana, we had what you call universal adult suffrage. Is it saying to us that we were ahead of the United States in that regard?
In some ways, yes. Not only us, but in many other colonies at the time, yes. In some ways, we were ahead of, of the United States and some other countries. Because when you look at the abolition of slavery, it was in 1863 that Lincoln signed the abolition treaty, the
We were
end
1838,
in slavery, the Caribbean and the rest of in the Caribbean itself, it was in 1838,
Yeah.
which tells you that the struggles here were very intense as well, for that matter. So in some ways, you're right that we were probably ahead of
Yes. Because when
we didn't have any, we did have, but like for instance, we did have the segregation or apartheid like America had. America had that up to 1965.
Yes.
You would say you had the civil rights, that was the whole aim of the civil rights movement, to end segregation, that white people, black people couldn't be living in the
Well,
same
you remember
place.
when Dr. Jagan went to study in the United States,
Yeah.
he experienced some of the very things that Martin Luther King fought against. And in fact, he was very much impressed and influenced by the Martin Luther kind of thinking.
And you said that's another discussion that we should have, because Dr. Jagan was quite different in his views than all the Caribbean leaders, and I suspect that that largely had to do with his education. That he was one of the only leaders of the Caribbean who was not educated in the United Kingdom, and he was in the United States at the time when there was still some. You had well, he experienced both. He experienced what the state, the apartheid style of state, or the segregation state, but he also experienced an American government that still had some revolutionary values, in the sense that they were against colonialism. They were calling on all the European powers that had colonies to end colonialism and so on and so forth. So he grew up, he was not indoctrinated, because the British education system was one that really was about to train local people to run their country as if the British had never left. And that is why, if you look at some of the messages in the 1950s to the PPP Congress from Caribbean leaders, you will see them saying that, well, you are the PPP is the only party that doesn't betray its people, etc., etc. Because the whole region, many of the leaders who started out with strong anti-colonialism began to compromise themselves as they see the possibility of independence coming.
As you're on the PPP, would you say that the PPP has adopted some of these principles, as it were, from Gandhi, from Martin Luther King, in our own struggle here under the Bonham dictatorship?
Yes, and for the same reasons, for some of the same reasons. I don't think that they unnecessarily that the PPP leaders were totally against fighting for freedom with other means. But I think very early, the PPP recognized that going in that direction would damage, would give an opportunity to the PNC, to the imperialists who were against them and so forth, to damage race relations even more and make it more difficult to reunite the race. So they resisted, although the temptation must have been very, very strong. They resisted going in that direction, recognizing the importance of having good race relations.
Well, you know, there were some people who were saying that Dr. Jagan was a little too soft, as it were, against the.
I think they totally did not understand. Dr. Jagan had grasped. He was one of the persons who had a very, very good grasp of the situation and the country, the reality of the country. And I think in fact, one of the reasons for the split in 1964 with Comrade Billy Ben and a few others who were supported Comrade Billy Ben at the time was over this question of the same tactics. Billy Ben was advocating that we carry a struggle against the PNC regime when it just came into the government and they were not yet consolidated and so forth. And while Dr. Jagan recognized the importance of that argument, his counter to that was that we have already degenerated from a national liberation struggle into racial conflict. And should we continue that, it will be much more hard to unite the people in the future.
Yes.
So he depended more on his ability to try to educate people and to forge a unity and to try to avoid bitterness among the racial groups within society.
That's a good point. That's a very good observation you have made here. But I want to come back to the United States a little, because I read only the other day research done by Pew or some agency, research agency, and the overwhelming number of Blacks in the United States felt that not much has changed in terms of their own access to resources, to jobs, to education, health. And I'm just asking you that whether you think that race relations in the United States have seen any significant improvement from the days when Martin Luther King was fighting to today.
But you know, the old saying, they say that the more things change, the more they remain the same. And so I would say yes and no. I would say yes in the sense that I think the American society have gone pretty far away in improving race relations. But that doesn't mean that they have gone to full length. I mean, look at some of the problems that exist, the Black Lives Movement, mother fighting against police brutality, etc., etc. The way Black people are targeted in some of these things are stereotyped into many things. But on the other hand, the very fact that who would have thought in 1963 when Martin Luther King was fighting in all of this, that in 2008, that America would have elected a black president. So I think that that's a giant step forward, even though for me, Obama was disappointing in many, many ways. But if you look at it from a purely from the point of view of race relations, I would say the American society has traveled a long distance. They have come some way. While there's still a lot of problems like this, some people don't want to see some of the changes that has taken place. And the fact that Obama was elected as president of the United States, he did not only have African American votes. The majority of the votes that he had was from white Americans. The vote for him.
I think you're right.
For that. So I will dismiss those who believe that that things are still stuck in the past. But what has remained, I mean, what is important to note is the nature of the state, that the state can adopt, that the imperialist state and the capitalist state is able to adjust, to change to some of these situations, because at the same time, the inequality that exists in America is stronger than any other time in the world today. That small 1.1% of the rich people got more wealth than the bottom 50%.
And that gap is increasing.
And that gap is increasing. So it's hard to give you one blank answer, but I would say that there is great progress while a lot of things still needs to be changed.
Well, one can say the same for Britain. Britain, for the first time, has a non-white prime minister, but there are some people who felt that nothing has changed. The structure of the British society remain by and large the same.
And those who do that will constantly make mistakes because they're not recognizing the reality that exists. That there are good possibilities that exist, better possibilities that exist to work towards unity of working people and to bring the struggle to focus away from differences of nationality and race to one of differences of class.
Well, I want to just come back a little home here in Guyana. Because as we were talking on this issue of race and race relations and ethnic sensitivity and all of that, how would you consider race relation in Guyana itself? Because I raise that because there are a lot of people who seem to be saying that, Guyana is now, there's marginalization against Black people and they're denied opportunities and what's not. As a former president, and having regard to your own insight knowledge of what the PPP has been doing to bridge the racial divide in this country. How would you answer those people who
I would say
saying,
those who say that and those who are advocating that are people who have they do not have the interests of this nation at heart. They are not dealing with reality, and what they're doing is artificially trying to create conditions and making people feel that they are being discriminated against. And that is the same old lesson. There, between you and me, the PNC itself has never been a national party. The PNC was created by the British and supported later on by the Americans in order to stop the independence. And they have not changed. And you know my views, we talk about this on another subject. Because it is very clear that government, one of the things that characterize the PPP and the PPP governments from its inception is its total anti-racial position that it always had. And if you look at how the PPP manages the state, manages the resources of the state, no one can ever say that the PPP is discrimination. The security forces are fundamentally African allies. And that is very, if the PPP was doing 1/4 of what people like David Hines and Lincoln Lewis and the rest of them were saying that the PPP was doing, it couldn't last for a week. It couldn't last for a week. And when you look too at the PPP coming into government at different times, they didn't do any mass dismissal like the PNC did. PNC knock off even sweepers and so forth because of their ethnicity. PPP, the minimal people were removed from their position. The head of the GRA is still there, and many other persons who the PNC appointed. And those were political appointments by the PNC, and they have not been dismissed. So I would say those people who are carrying that line, they're carrying it with a purpose of, and if you go and read Jane Siddery's doctoral thesis that she wrote at Harvard University, you will see where she described the technique that PNC used in generating racism within the society. Now, the other point I would like to make is that in where do you have racial situation and real racial problems existing, it always has an economic underpinning. And while it is true in our country that the majority of rich people, local people who are rich, are Indians, the vast majority of Indians and Africans have the same living standard, I would say. And therefore, you cannot find any economic basis to describe anything in this country as racist. There is no exploitation of one race to benefit another race. Where is that? Point that out to me and to see where there is any policy or anything that is being done that one race is being exploited at the expense of another race, as happened in South Africa, as happened in the United States, as happened in the United Kingdom and many other countries where you really had racial problems.
You know, it's a paradoxical situation in Guyana.
The point I was trying to make is that there is no objective basis to talk about racism in our society, meaning that there's no economic underpinning of it. No. It is more of a psychological, it is more superficial than it is. And that is why if you go around our country, you will see people of different ethnic groups getting along fairly well with each other. They have no problem. They socialize together. They marry one another. They drink together. They sport together. They don't have this type
Well,
of,
I
it is
share that
only
view.
injected from outside.
I share that view because I always felt that we are a very good example of a multiracial society, notwithstanding what people may want to say about us. But people in this country don't hate each other because of how they look, what ethnic group they belong to, and all of that. I think there's a high degree of cordiality among the races in this country.
Yeah, I think so.
And so this question, as Dr. Jagan earlier said some time ago, that we should not overestimate race, nor should we sweep it under the carpet at the same time.
But Dr. Jagan was also very strong in something that we're not doing now. He was very strong about the electoral system. If you go back to the time when they were introducing the electoral system, you will see that he was warning that the electoral system was being changed by the British to facilitate racial racism within the country. And because it allows and it encourages organization on the basis of race. And as long as we have this system in place, the PNC will never change. I mean, look at what happened immediately after the elections at West Indies, when something that is totally not political, the PNC can pick their fingers and get a whole set of people coming out. Look at what happened recently at Moderator. So the PNC, it would be wrong to say that their propaganda is not having some impact. It has had some influence on people, ordinary people, to come out and express hostility and what have you, particularly Africans against Indians. Indians who supported the PPP more had a different kind of experience, and therefore the whole situation was totally different from that. So I would say unless you change back the system to force political parties to deal with issues and not to be organizing on the basis of differences, but on national issues, we will not be able to solve this problem.
But I just want to draw attention to even before the imposition of PR in the 1961, maybe the early 60s, you had race problems in this country far more intense than we have today.
It was more,
and that was under the what gave you the impression that now if you change back that can
because if you look at the 1961 elections, last election that we had the constituency system. And this is one of the reasons I believe that the electoral system has changed. There were about 4 constituencies where the majority of the electorate were African Guyanese that the PPP won. And that, I think, sent a message to the Americans and the British that if you give Jagan time, he will heal this racial gap within the society.
Well,
he will heal it. And therefore, he cannot be given time. And PR was used because he knows that is a tool of keeping people divided. It was used for that purpose to ensure that the PPP is not successful in their efforts to bring racial unity in the country.
So by extension, you're saying that given the PPP policies and programs which are people-oriented and that transcends race and all of that, you feel that the PPP at some point in time would be able to bridge this ethnic.
Yeah, but I still think that that one of the good things in this country is the PPP as a political party, from Cheddi, Jagan right down to Cheddi, we have never yield to any temptation to organize on the basis of race. That is a characteristic feature of the PPP. There's never, with all the accusations against it and so forth, they just make these general statements without anyone coming out with any concrete facts. And so it has never done that. And that I think is one of the things that saved this country a lot in the past. But I believe that we can't only depend on that. We have to create the condition to force all political parties that operate here to deal more with national issues than to deal with sectorial interests within the country.
Well, today in Guyana is Budget Day, and the budget has always been used as an instrument to facilitate development across the globe. And I know that some of our viewers...
I think also the topic that we're in with Martin Luther King, I think his teaching applies to Guyana very, very strongly as well. Because Martin Luther King never yielded up, despite the racism that African Americans face. Martin Luther King never yielded to that position. He always took a very, he called a spade. He described the situation, he condemned it and everything, but he always advocated that people live together, work together. His famous speech, I have a dream, was the best of all that he's done. And I think if political leaders in this society can take a lead from Martin Luther King's philosophical position and his action, I think our society could be not only the American Martin Luther King teaching, not only applicable to the United States, but you will find applicability of many of the things that he dealt with. You will find them applicable in probably all countries in the world that you have applicability to what he did.
I can't agree with you more. But and it speaks a lot to the measure of the man too, that no other person in the United States, I think apart from one president before him, has a holiday on his birthday, and non-president whose birthday in the United States is a federal holiday. And that speaks a lot of how much highly regarded and respected, I would say.
Yeah. But I think that's a fantastic recognition. But at the same time, we must not lose sight of the fact that many of those who decided to do that was to try to rob the teachings of Martin Luther King of its revolutionary fervor, of those things that dealt with change, that the changes that he wanted to bring about within his own society himself. He gave a beautiful speech that is not one of the popular mainstream speeches, where he spoke. Of course, he took his thesis from the Bible that he was speaking about God recognizing David for what he had in his heart, his good intention of wanting to do something, but he was not necessarily being able to achieve it. And he turned that into a fantastic speech to talk about in societies when you try to fight for good things, for changes and so forth. Sometimes you always don't live to see the benefits of them, but it is important that you do what is right and what is good.
Well, I think we may have to bring this program to a close, but I just wanted to say that without any doubt, Martin Luther King has made a big impact on the national consciousness of people, not only in the United States, but in the world as well. And I think he ranked tall among the great men of history. And I would rank him the likes of Mandela, people like, even Cheddi Jagan here in Guyana, Mahatma Gandhi. These are big names. And I think he is in the big league of great men in the world.
No doubt about that at all. I think he's one of those people, as I said at the beginning of this program, it is 55 years since he died. He only lived 39 years when we're talking about him at this point in time. Because the further we move away from that period of his lifetime, the greater we see the importance and the relevance of his teaching and the applicability of his teaching to many of the problems that we face in the world today. But I would just want also to emphasize again that we should not fall into the trap where we delude him of delude his teaching of the revolutionary nature, the changes that he wanted to bring about. And in fact, it was at that